Welcome back to the MoKan Sports Report, another episode. This time, instead of having Joe and his constant movement on the pod, we've got a longtime friend of the show, longtime contributor to the brand, Kansas City basketball expert, especially in those big Eastern Kansas conferences, Zach Wolzen. Kansas City born and bred. He's been with us for about a year now, pretty much a year. We can finally get an intern out of your bio because we've got a funner job. You'll be seeing him on the Kansas side for a lot of our EKL and just overall Eastern Kansas topics. Um, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about those two big conferences, get into some picks for him in the state of Kansas, and also look at some teams that could potentially be disruptors. It always feels like there's more talent in Kansas City, and we've seen that gap kind of close just a little bit recently. We talked about it yesterday I mean, there's 10 teams in Wichita that are ranked or in Western Kansas, but Kansas City is still kind of holding on to that title of the Kings of Kansas. And I think this year, as we get into some of our picks, could very well still be intact. Obviously, starting in the Sunflower League, Shawnee Mission Northwest is the expectation is that they're going to go 25-0 again and win another
Yeah.
state title. But there's an interesting chase pack. Today you came out with your picks, which I've got a couple questions about. There's some teams that I think you and I are a little further away on, and some teams that I think we're close on. Let's start in the Sunflower League, and then we'll move on to the EKL. Just from top to bottom, you've got Shawnee Mission Northwestern first. Um, not a shocker there. Mill Valley, I also have second. What do you think the difference between Mill Valley and that pack of Olathe schools that kind of sits right under them is?
Um, I I had the opportunity to go to a lot of Mill Valley games last year, and I was really impressed with what I saw from their young playmakers. Reese Riedel especially, he really just took over games, and then Ja'Kai Carter also just a really dynamic playmaker, and returning Carter Cafis, they're gonna be really strong this year, I'm sure. But Northwest, of course, is just the front runner, and I do see them dropping a couple games, unlike Joe yesterday. But I still think they're gonna take the conference for sure.
Yeah, I think that the one of the things about Mill Valley that I find interesting is that although they have less size than they did last year, they lost a big man. I can't think of his name. War 33, Mason Kemp.
Mason.
Um, they still have Carter Cafis, who's kind of more of an outside wing. Uh, but like we said, their offensive and really their defensive backcourt as well with Reese and Ja'Kai Carter. I think Ja'Kai Carter really could be one of the best guards in Kansas as he continues to develop. If you're looking at his numbers, he shot interestingly poor from the 3-point line last year. He looked better in the film that we saw from the VWBA camp and some of his stuff over the summer. So I think if he's kind of able to just get more looks from outside this year, he could be incredibly dynamic. But Reese is a good shooter. Carter Cafis can stretch the floor. We know that. That's kind of one of his marquee traits as well. So then we have that pack next of Olathe North, Olathe Northwest, and Olathe South. Um, I have Olathe West above them currently, besides Olathe North. What do you think keeps Olathe North and Olathe South in that conversation?
Well, of course, you hear a lot of great things about Olathe South with Nick Anderson and what he can do up there. So I don't really want to count them out. I feel like they're always a solid team, and I feel like they could play pretty well. But it's really tough separating these four Olathe schools. It'll be really interesting to see what happens down the stretch. But I think Olathe North is probably going to be the top one if I had to pick. Just they're usually dominant among the Olathe schools. They've got Cameron Love, their other guard, Jalen Watson, just really dynamic. I just think they could probably make the plays down the stretch to pull away from those other schools. But it'll definitely be a close one.
I think the thing about Olathe North that is discounted when we're ranking these teams is you think about, okay, well, who do they match up poorly against? And I think if you look at Shawnee Mission Northwest, that is a tough matchup for them because they're not a very big team. They don't really have anybody on that roster that I think that can guard Ethan Taylor for 32 minutes. Um, Everybody always wants to talk about how Jalen Watson is not the biggest player in the world. I mean, he still gets it done defensively. He averaged almost 4 steals a game, if I can think correctly last year. And he scores the ball well, irregardless to, if Keaton Wagler's guarding him and I mean, he's got a clear size disadvantage. They're still able to capitalize off things like that. So I think that's kind of why they're discounted outside of I think Mill Valley and Shawnee Mission Northwest maybe are in just a slightly different category. Olathe Northwest, I think they've got some good top end talent. We saw them I think they've got two or three guys towards that bottom of the top 50 we put out last week. What interests you about the Ravens?
I mean, I know they've got some really good players. They have a guy that can rival Ethan Taylor. They've got a 7 foot center there, JJ Lee. So they've got the size, they've got the guards and Gavin Popick in them. I feel like they could be really dynamic. Last year, they were just a team that just lost a lot of close games early, but were still really able to get it done when they needed to. So I think if they take just another step forward this year, they could really be put up in that top conversation.
Yeah, and I think the way JJ Lee is built also kind of contributes to maybe having them in that conversation. Don't have a ton of numbers from Olathe Northwest last year, but as you mentioned, they did drop a couple interestingly close ones at the beginning of the year. They played Mill Valley really close both times they played, if I remember correctly. Uh, and having them at 4, I think could end up being one of your best like legacy picks at the end of the year where you're like, hey, I had a couple things wrong, but look at this.
Yeah.
Next, you have that pack of Shawnee Mission South, Olathe West, and Shawnee Mission East, which I think are three more. It's incredible how good the Sunflower League has become in basketball. Shawnee Mission South, what impressed you about that group of guys?
I don't know. I just really like how they played really well last year. I mean, or against they played consistently, right? They
Uh-huh.
would play good against bad teams, but then against like the better teams, they could never really get it done or never really figure it out. But I think this year they just get to build on their youth
Uh-huh.
and they can put together some more wins. But
They're
then Olathe West, I
uh,
have right under them. I see what you're saying. Olathe West is a really interesting team because as you were saying yesterday on the pod, they have they just really work together. They don't have any like huge standout guys, but led by Brady Collar and all those guys, I feel like they could really work together and put together some good wins. But I just maybe see them falling victim to too many little trap games potentially.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the Sunflower League is the top 8 teams, even all the way down to Shawnee Mission East, are probably going to be ranked throughout the entire season. Like that's how good the Sunflower League is now that they have the potential to have 8 ranked teams. Um, Olathe West, I think, is in Shawnee Mission South are two very similar teams. I would agree that Shawnee Mission South is younger or was younger last year in comparison. Um, I think that they could be interestingly tough on some of the other middle of the pack teams. Like if you look at, I think they could beat Olathe South head to head. I think that's going to be probably a really interesting game. Olathe Northwest as well. And I really honestly think that any of that 3 through 5 Olathe stretch could actually work really well for them. Moving on, Shawnee Mission East, we touched on Olathe West, but Shawnee Mission East, it feels like they've always tugged up the rear of that little median group of Sunflower League teams. They're always in the hunt. This may be just slightly before your time, but there was a year where they went 11 and 10 and they had 2 ranked wins, and then they won out in the playoffs and went to the Final Four. So that team sneakily reminds me of the team that they've got now. I do believe genuinely that they could be pretty good. Yeah, I think this is going to be like a 14 and 8 kind of year out of them. Like maybe just in that category where you're like, well, they could be a disruptor in the playoffs, so they're going to stay on the radar for rankings and things like that. But there's a good chance that they don't, you know, get out of a tough subset. Because I mean, if you look at all of these teams, right, it's going to be a pretty tough draw in any sub-state bracket. Like you're probably going to have to play one of Shawnee Mission Northwest, Mill Valley, Blue Valley Northwest, like a school like that. You're going to have to play them to get to the state playoffs. And there's not really any of those groups that I think they match up against specifically well. I think Blue Valley Northwest could be a tough game. But when it comes to, the Shawnee Mission Northwest and the Mill Valleys of the world, I think they could probably get handled. I think the thing about both of the Lawrence schools is they're kind of adjusting to a new era of basketball for them. Obviously, for Lawrence, it's post Jackson King, and for Free State, it's a new head coaching a slew of coaching changes over the last couple of years. You feel like you hit the jackpot, and Zeke Brown plays super well as a freshman there, freshman and sophomore, and then he's at Oak Park now. So you kind of have to you rebuild, and you think you're heading in that right direction, and then you kind of have to restart. I think they could be a team that flip-flops with Lawrence. I do think Free State probably has a chance to be the better group out of those two this year. Um, but still, one of those teams out of the Lawrence all the way down to Shawnee Mission West, one of those teams is going to win a peculiarly good game. They're going to beat a ranked team. All of them are. It's almost like clockwork that one of them is going to beat a ranked team. Um, I'm certainly interested to see how that kind of bottom plays out. I don't think that there's really a true like sleeper team in the Sunflower League just because they're very top heavy. They have that pack of good Olathe schools in Mill Valley and Shawnee Mission Northwest. And one of those schools I almost guarantee will win the Sunflower League. And if I had to make my pick, I would say Shawnee Mission Northwest.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record going with everyone saying that, but I do see that they could drop a couple of games. That game against Mill Valley at Mill Valley is definitely on my calendar. Can't wait to see what happens there. You never know, but of course it'll be hard for Mill Valley to match up with them. But I think Northwest is they're really well equipped. They got everyone back, everything going for them. But
Yeah.
that's when you take things too lightly.
Right. And I do think the thing that we haven't really touched on is that the vibe is a little different, like around that team. Last year it was, oh, these guys are really good, but they're young. They kind of had a couple things to prove. They have a different set of things to prove now. They have to prove that they can do it again.
Yeah,
Uh, which I would argue is even tougher because now not only do you have to prove that, but you've got the target on your back from the media and for all of the other players in the Sunflower League that know that. I mean, you're going to get everybody's A+ game.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and I agree that I think that there's a couple games that are going to be closer than maybe they were last year, just out of principle. But I very well could see them going 25-0 again and just having no problem. Uh,
yeah. Of course, yeah. Sorry, as you said, they're going to get everyone's best shot. They're everyone's Super Bowl at this point. They've got a really tough game. They get to play Link Academy in Illinois, so that's going to be an interesting game to see if they can
I think it'll be
like
interesting. I'll let you know how I think that's going to go after tomorrow, right? No, 2 days from now, when Springfield Central plays Link. At Link, I'm pretty sure. I thought about driving down there to go to that game, but I think that's an exhibition. I should probably figure that out. But they played him close last year. They played Link close last year. Pembroke Hill has played Link close historically, so very well could see a top end of the line game. And then that, of course, as we talked about yesterday, they've got Oak Park at the beginning of the year at the 8-10 shootout.
can't wait.
We'll move on to the EKL, which I want to ask. I'm going to make you answer yes or no to this question. Historically speaking, the EKL has been a very good basketball conference, especially in the Fritz era at Blue Valley Northwest, and Blue Valley North has had some really good championship teams. Obviously, Miege, SJ, and Aquinas are always a write-in for one of them to go to a state championship. Do you think that this year the Sunflower League has the better all-around conference for basketball than the EK?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think just as top heavy as like the Sunflower, of course they've got depth, but those few teams at the top, I don't think Blue Valley Northwest can mess with Shawnee Mission Northwest. I don't think Aquinas will be able to beat Mill Valley this year. It's just those type of matchups that might have gone differently a year prior
Mhm.
are probably starting to swing in the Sunflower's favor this year.
Yeah, I would argue that they're probably the top three or four teams from the Sunflower League. If you threw them in the EKL, they'd have a pretty good shot at winning it this year. Um, Blue Valley Northwest is still Blue Valley Northwest. I think this year is going to be a development year for them. I still think that it's insane that they're the best team in their conference on paper. And you still say, ah, well, they're young. They've got a lot of freshmen and sophomores on that roster. And I mean, Aaron, I'm doing a great job there. That you would expect that when you lose a Hall of Fame head coach, that you're going to have like 1 year where you go, ah, well, this is a development year. They're still probably going to win 18, 19 games. And that's a development year for Blue Valley Northwest, which just tells you A, how good their program is holistically, and B, how good of a coach Aaron Hyman is. That you get the keys to the city after 17 years of Ed Fritz. And year one you win a state championship. And year two you go to the Final Four. So um I think that they will take a slight step back. I don't think that they're quite the team that they were last year. Obviously, they lost Jake Fritz and what was his name? A really good defensive player. Good for
Uh,
Joey
Mattioni.
Mattioni. Yeah, I knew he had a super Italian last name. Um, he was one of my favorite players to watch from like a film study standpoint because wherever he was supposed to be, he was. Like he very seldom did anything incorrect, especially on defense. He was always great in help side. He used his size well, things like that. So I think your EKL rankings have really not thrown me for a loop, but I'm so interested. So we got Blue Valley
Yeah.
Northwest one. We've covered that. Aquinas, Blue Valley North, and Blue Valley are your next three. Is there how far do you think the gap between Aquinas and Blue Valley North is?
I think the gap between Aquinas and St. James down at 5 is could be pretty non-existent come mid-season.
Okay, I would
I
agree.
think we'll have to see how it begins, like how it starts to shift towards the beginning of the season. Can have to see how the Shawnee Mission East tournament goes for a couple of these teams that are in it. But Blue Valley, they've got some really good young players. PJ Thiel, 6'10", he can find his way to the rim for sure.
Did he
And
go to
you got
Rockhurst? Have I lost my mind? Because I swore 2 years ago he was on Rockhurst roster. When we used to put in stats, I remember being like, "Oh, they've got a 6'8" guy on their roster that's a freshman." But anywho, continue. I do think he could very well be one of the best players in the EKL this year.
Yeah, and of course, Blue Valley North, they did lose one of their guards transferred over to Park Hill or Park Hill South, but
I think it was
of course they got
Raytown.
CJ Duzen with a really good summer for him. Will Davis, as a freshman last year, saw incredible things out of him. They've got some big guys as well, so I think if they just put together the pieces, the wins will come.
Yeah.
And then of course Aquinas with London Burton and Isaiah Freeman could really make some moves, but it really hurts losing Will Good to Charter over the summer. But they can still make moves for sure.
Yeah. Well, on the Blue Line North end, they lose Jaron Lashley and Des Henson. I think Des Henson's at Raytown South. I will know within the
Yeah,
week
maybe.
which of the South schools he's at, but I'm fairly certain it's Raytown South. You lose Greg Ballard. You lose him as well. So you lose your top three scorers. But I think Will Davis has the opportunity to be like a one of one level force for them. CJ, I think Gavin George comes back as well. They're gonna have some growing pains, but I think if they figure it out early enough in the year, there's a pretty good chance that they could compete for the league championship. Like I think that Blue Valley Northwest will be a tough out, but if for some reason Blue Valley Northwest drops one early in the year, and I think Blue Valley Northwest could really do well in the driver's seat for that conference as well. Aquinas, I mean, we both agree. You look at Isaiah Freeman and you look at um, Lennon Burton, who dunked over Landon at the original All-Star basketball. They are a very top-heavy team. They remind me, as I was talking about Raytown yesterday, they're like Raytown in Kansas. They have two very good scorers, and then the rest of the team is just going to have to be 3-and-D players that play the role well. And I think Aquinas has a history of doing that. So I wouldn't be shocked if they're a team that, as the postseason draws near, You say, oh, these guys could probably get it done. Um, the St. James and Blue Valley West section of this is, I think, where you and I start to differ. I'm a little bit higher on Blue Valley West. I feel like I'm always higher on Blue Valley West.
Yeah.
Um, but St. James, you know more about St. James than I could ever imagine. So tell me your idea behind this pick.
Well, it's really tricky. Of course, Blue Valley West, it just got so many question marks for me
Mhm.
on who's going to fill the shoes of all them great players that left. I can't remember Gavin something. They're really good point guard. He was really good there. But the thing with St. James last year, they really struggled. Lost like a lot of big seniors in 2022, like a whole starting roster. So only left with one starter, one senior playing last year, essentially. So we've got the whole roster back. Really good shooter in Emmett Peters, really good guard, point guard. I think all the pieces are there. We've got the bigs. I think it could go well. Maybe not as well as like an Aquinas or a Northwest, of course, but I think it could be enough to like probably end up higher than a Blue Valley West team that's got a lot of question marks and a lack of experience.
Yeah, I think you lose. So Blue Valley West loses Gavin Harvey and William Watson off the top, and then Eli Lovich also kind of played a big role in that team as well. Cade Wysong, Luke Goodale, and Tate Nagy are really going to have to carry this group on the top end. Um, I very much agree with your St. James Academy point, though, where 2 years ago they had a really good team, but everybody that really played meaningful time for that team was a senior, -1. So last year it was the expectation was that they were going to have some growing pains. The record looks worse than I think it actually was because it's a hard schedule. I mean,
Yeah.
you play
Yeah.
a ton of ranked teams. You lose some close ones, like a 3-point loss to Seaman, a decently close loss to Blue Valley North, a really close loss to Belton. So games like that down the stretch that, I think probably teeter the other way. I could probably see this game. I think Blue Valley West is the better team, and that's my subjective opinion. I like Emmett Peters a lot, and I think that he is primed to have a really good year. He'll be a junior this year, correct?
Yeah.
I think that you I'm gonna look at how he's playing after 2 weeks, and then that will give you a pretty good idea of what that team's gonna look like for the rest of the year. Obviously, there are other pieces on that group that'll really help get the job done. But I think those are the two uh, I would say the most interesting part of your EKL rankings. Um, and then Southwest and Miege kind of tugging up the rear here. It's a new era of Miege basketball, the post
Well,
Rick Zeich
it
era.
this is what makes the EKL so interesting because Southwest and Miege, I think they are still they are good teams still. I think they are miles above the bottom of the Sunflower. But the thing with
I would,
Miege, I could easily have Miege at 6 or 7 to be honest. They're still young. They're struggling still to find their identity with the new head coach, and I think they can make waves. They can make plays. Liam Tesmer really impressive. Only a sophomore now. It they have a lot of potential. And Blue Valley Southwest, they're kind of in a similar boat to Blue Valley West, losing a ton of senior production. Kind of, we saw in their football team this year. Of course, a lot of their football guys started on their basketball team last year, and football team was really good. Basketball team was pretty solid, 14-8 season, and we saw how the football team kind of fell off from a year prior, where they almost beat Mill Valley to go to state. So I see maybe a similar thing happening here, but of course they still got plenty of playmakers that can step up. Nash Ferguson, Eli Mick, make plays and
yeah, I
win
think
games.
Eli Mick is going to have an interesting season. He was just above 8 points a game last year. A younger guy, shot the ball 38% 3-point shooter. So if he kind of takes a step, I think that they could uh, pick up some interesting wins. But I would generally agree that although it's tighter than the Sunflower League, that the bottom two in the EKL are pretty definite. At least from a on paper standpoint. This is why we play 20, however, 23 games in can how many can you play in Kansas now? 26 next.
It's 20, but it's gonna be 23 next year, I believe.
Okay. because and it was. I remember having this conversation about baseball where it's like, just make it the same as Missouri, please.
Yeah,
Because there's going to be a point. It is one of my favorite points when there's a Kansas City team that's 14-1 and there's a Kansas team that's 6-0. And you're like, how do I put these two together? Like
yeah,
one team has played in one tournament and two non-con games, and the other team has played 15 games. And you're like, it just makes people like us, it makes our life harder, which I guess is why I'm mad about it. But um, yeah, it's and then there's other things where Kansas is like just significantly further in front of Missouri. Like you look at the shot clock this year that you're going to see in a bunch of schools. Like Kansas is the one that's in front of this. Like that's who's making
yeah,
making the stride here. I'm really interested to see how the shot clock does play out throughout games. I think there's teams that kind of took advantage of snail balling at the end of games, and now it's going to be interesting. I think we're officially in the territory where it pays to have a guy that can get you a bucket on either end of the floor at any time.
yeah,
Um, and the really, really good teams, I think, don't really have that problem, like the snail ball problem, anyways. Um, but at least now we won't have to deal with when there's 48 seconds left, being like, this could potentially be the last possession of this game. Like Oak Park
yeah.
did
Of course.
12 times last year, where you were like, oh.
Yeah, I've been listening to the Sunflower Smack Show full
Mm,
podcast about some women's basketball in the Sunflower League. Shout
mm,
out, and I've heard they've had a lot of the coaches on, and they've talked a lot about what they think the shot clock is going to mean for games, and they all are saying the same thing. They all say it's probably not going to affect the game as much as you think, but it will really affect those late outcomes, like especially within 4 minutes at the end of the game,
right.
to see like to keep games from getting kind of cheesy in a way. So I think it'll
Yeah.
be a great addition. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I think that there will be less games that end with scores in the 30s and 40s because of that, which is more of a Kansas thing than it is a Missouri thing, but it's gotten significantly better over the last couple of years. And then there's always, the top three or four teams in Kansas are going to score 35 points a night or
Yeah.
55 points a night anyways. Uh, like I guarantee I don't even have it pulled up. I guarantee you that Shawnee Mission Northwest did not score less than 50 points in any game last year. There's absolutely no chance that that was a thing. And that's just off the top of my head. I can't think of, let's look. Yeah, they scored more than 50 in every game. No, I lied. I stand corrected. They had two in the really close game in the Northtown tournament against Grandview, which is I think the only game that I can remember of them last year where I was like, they might lose this game. As Ethan Taylor was in foul trouble and Grandview had
Yeah.
really scrappy guards and they were fun to watch. And then they didn't score 50 in the state game against Heights, which I don't
Yeah.
know. I remember at halftime of that game being like, this is disgustingly bad on offense.
Hmm.
It was bad. Shawnee Mission Northwest played that really interesting though. They shot 50% from the field, 40% from three, and 90% from the line that game. And it was just like, how do you only have 47 points? But
Yeah.
anywho, we'll talk briefly. I think this kind of ties to our last thing here. Picks 4-6-5 and 4A in Kansas. Um, I want to know where you stand on this. I feel like I'm pretty firm in who I think is going to win. Uh, it also helps that all I do is write my opinion all day. So,
Yeah.
who do you have winning 6A?
Well, I want to be different. I want to pick like a Wichita Heights. I want to pick like a Blue Valley Northwest somehow. But I think just for the sake of not starting off on the wrong foot here, I have to go with Shawnee Mission Northwest because it's at this point it's their championship to lose. They've already done it once. Same guys back. Why shouldn't they do it again? So I guess just raise the stakes for them. And as far as 5A goes, I'm not sure, of course. Like you've got your Pipers, you've got Shawnee Heights that are a loaded up team this year. You've got, of course, a couple other teams. You got like Andover Central, May South lost a few guys, but they'll be solid. You've got your Aquinas, I guess. You've got St. James, but
Uh,
I don't know.
I
It's kind of a toss up.
I think you said Shawnee Heights, and I think they're interesting. Jarrett Sanchez and Cam Ross are going to be two guys that are in that conversation for UKC, United Kansas Conference Player of the Year. Um, I think that Shawnee Heights this year reminds me of what Piper was last year, if that makes any sense. And I think Piper is one of the only teams that I can think of that lost an elite level player and maybe got better. Like I don't think they're better than they were last year, but they're definitely in the same category that they were at the end of last year.
Yeah,
PJ Moore
absolutely.
is legit. I am a big PJ Moore believer. He was their leading scorer last year. He was big in big games for them, and I think this year, if he's able to make that leap from quietly the best scorer on a team to poignantly the best scorer in a conference, um, I think they could win it all. They are my I may be wrong, but I doubt it pick to win 5A. It's between Piper and
Yeah.
Highland Park, in my opinion. Um, and I just think that Piper has the better build for it. I think Highland Park is the better team on paper, but I'm gonna go with my gut and say Piper.
Yeah, of course, Highland Park, a team like I kind of forgot about, blanked out there. And then, of course, you also have Capon, right?
Yeah,
The defending champions. Of course, they lost Will Thangville, but Corbin Johnson coming in strong. I think they could definitely make a run for it as well. I mean, of course, they're a bit younger, but they're still up there in that conversation. Wouldn't want to count them out, seeing as they just won it. But
yeah, and then 4A, I hate to, continue to beat a dead horse, but I think McPherson wins it again. I don't think they go 25 and 0 again, but I think that uh they win that conference and I think they've got a pretty good shot um to repeat it 4A. Some of those other Western Kansas schools are good as well. Don't be surprised if somehow Bishop Miege gets there again. Have you seen the stats today that's like Bishop Miege hasn't lost a football
I'm
game?
pretty sure I retweeted that the football one.
Yeah, 4A team since
Yeah,
2008.
yeah,
I mean, it's
that's
kind of
crazy.
it's
That's
obscene.
crazy.
It's kind of obscene. And then all the comments are like, Keisha could fix this, but they don't. And Keisha tried to fix it. They tried to fix it, but the Kansas's state Congress wouldn't let them. Like Miege has politicians for this. I'm kidding, but
Yeah,
I don't be surprised if for some reason the state game is like Miege versus like is Rock Creek for yeah, Miege versus Rock Creek,
yeah,
Miege versus
yeah,
Pratt. I think Baldwin's up there too. Cooper Carr is really good.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, I think 4A is probably the tightest, most compact of the big class in Kansas. Um, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of good ground here. Obviously, making some of these picks in the preseason is a little tough because
Yeah.
there's going to be one of these teams that we're really high on that probably just isn't as good as they're expected to be, or unfortunate injuries. Like I know Carter Cafus got sick and missed 3 games last year. So it's always interesting. I think, as I've mentioned the last 2 episodes, Kansas is getting better, like a lot better. Obviously, historically, Kansas is very good. You've got guys we mentioned yesterday, Christian Brown,
Yeah.
Perry Ellis, guys like that have came out of Kansas. Um, but Kansas City and St. Louis on the Missouri side have always felt like they're in front. And I think that gap is as close as it ever has been. And I'm really, really excited to see, especially some of these really top of the line prospects uh, in full game action coming up soon. I'm really excited to see guys like Nick Anderson, um, a guy who I think we've underrated in our player rankings. So I'm interested to see people come out and make us look like idiots.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. I can't wait to see games start kicking off in 2 to 3 weeks, especially, of course, that Shawnee Mission Northwest versus Oak Park game. Of
Hmm.
course, Shawnee Mission Northwest and Oak Park did play over the summer, and Oak
Yeah,
Park did win. So it'll be interesting to see how those teams approach that game.
yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see how different that game is from the one they played this summer. I think that there were some key differences that you'll see
Yeah.
when when everybody's playing to win that game outright because it's the biggest game in Kansas City this year, I think, and everybody has
Mhm.
kind of agreed. in that regard. I think they both play tough schedules. I can't think of who Shawnee Mission Northwest plays at the Ramey Basketball Showcase, but they've got there's some interesting teams that they played throughout the Midwest. Obviously, they had Little Rock Central last year.
They've got Millwood in
Millwood.
Oklahoma.
Okay, Millwood, Oklahoma. But yeah, very interesting. There's a lot of conversations to be had, and I think that's why we started this 2 weeks before the season starts, and there will be some primarily Missouri conversations for the rest of the week, as there's a ranked game in Missouri on Friday of this week, John Burroughs and Ladue. Um, I'm exceedingly excited to see games kick off. But Zach, thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow on the 21st is the next episode after this. I keep
Yeah,
today plus two. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, Zach, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you at the end of this week.
Thank you.